Health IQ podcast episode, Unplugged, Digital Detox. Are you worried about your kids' screen time? It's not just about addiction. It's affecting their brains and bodies in ways you might not expect. Let's get into it.
Today we have a topic that will be of interest to all parents and grandparents who want their children to grow into healthy, well-balanced adults. It is not a secret that as a society we are facing many mental health issues that increased during the pandemic years. They are often caused by the amount of time we spend on our devices. Joining me at the table today is Janet Griffiths. She's a faculty member at Mesalands Community College. And one of the classes that she teaches is about child development and getting people ready to be early childhood teachers. Our film crew is Joyce Runyon and Bobby Hockaday, and I am Brenda Bishop. Janet, thank you for joining us again. Several months ago, you shared with us some ways to help children thrive, young children thrive, and things parents could do. And you mentioned screen time.
Right.
And we didn't have time to delve into that, so we thought it would be good to bring you back for a deeper discussion on screen time and how it affects young children. Dr. Laura Markham said, the earlier we introduce screens, the more it affects the child's brain development and the more likely they will have trouble managing addiction to screens and technology later in life. And I know, we don't often think about that because we didn't grow up
It's true.
with phones or sometimes not even TV.
True.
That was pretty limited. So we were outside playing in the dirt and building all those connectors that our young children are not doing nowadays. And I know even though my kids didn't grow up with phones, now they are just like every time you see them, they're all like this on their devices all day long. So even as adults, we have trouble regulating that screen time. So I thought it'd be really good to start just talking about how the screens change a child's development.
Well, I think we don't really even know the ramifications yet. It's so new. And we're just beginning to understand a little bit of what so much technology and so much screen time is doing to our young kids. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they say no screen time for any child under 2, 0. And 1 to 2 hours for a child over 2. But you think about how realistic is that in our day and age. I mean, I see people handed babies cell phones all the time. You're somewhere and babies, and they're crying if they don't get the phone. Parents handing them their phone. And I understand that. I mean, I think we all realize, that would be, there's times that would have been wonderful when we had kids. We would have really appreciated having that ability to do that. But I think, as you said, young adults, older adults, all of us, we're pretty addicted to our phones as it is. And kids are watching that, and they're putting all their time and energy into some kind of screen. And then we also have to realize how much screen time they're on at school. That's one thing, the pandemic, you talked about the pandemic, that's one thing that brought in. I mean, it was already here, but it amplified that big time because they brought in so much screen time to our children at school. One study that it was a new study I just got the other day that someone sent to me, and it said they're finding that kindergarten kids don't have enough core muscles, their core strength. They don't have enough core strength to sit up all day. They're having to go back and do tummy time with 5-year-olds to try to get them to build those core muscles. And I talked to a local kindergarten teacher and I just said, "Are you seeing this?" And she said, "Absolutely. Absolutely, we see it." She said, I don't know how many students she said probably 3/4 of them really should have occupational therapy. So said, we're having to do that in the classroom. We're having to go back and build muscles Whereas, most of the time, little kids by 5, they're running and playing and doing. And I asked her, I said, what do you think that is? She said, I think they just lounge around a lot. They have phones in their hand and they're lounging, or they're laying and watching TV and they're laying with an iPad. They're not,
Out moving around.
out moving around and being
Running
active,
around.
which is kind of scary if you think you don't have enough core strength at 5. I mean, we know it affects fine motor skills. We're finding little ones, they can't hold pencils, they can't hold crayons, they can't, they even turn a doorknob. Some of them do not have enough strength in their hands. They have a strong finger, a swiping finger. They can swipe. They can do that from, 6 months old. That finger is tough. But the rest of their hands and their strength, they have a hard time with.
So yesterday I watched a fascinating webinar, very scary though. And one of the things they talked about is the difference between passive and interactive screen time. And so, we've always said, way back from when I was, had my kids, limit your screen time based on your age for, less than 2 hours or less than this. But all those studies were talking about passive screen time.
Okay.
And so passive screen time is like watching TV, watching a movie. But active screen time is what we do now, where we have to use our fingers and move and we interact with whatever it is that it is. And so that changes how our brains react to whatever the stimulus is. And so we were talking about kids screaming and their parents hand them phones. They were talking about it's because we developed this need to have more stimulation from our active devices.
That's interesting. That's fascinating.
It is. It was very scary.
Yeah.
As they talked about the brain not developing because of that. And that, just like you said, we don't learn those motor skills. We're not out doing the other things that we need to be doing as young children, even stacking blocks and those kinds of toys that we all did. Hiking up and down the road, and I don't know,
Yeah, I always lived out in the country, so I didn't have neighbors. But you hear kids talk about playing, up and down the streets, all with all their friends, and then till nighttime. Then they came in and ate and went to bed, and but it was the end of it, And I think one thing that this book, this is kind of an old book, but I love this picture of this book really sums up. And I looked at this today because she wrote this about 10 years ago, 2013. But, you can see the zoned out look of this child, which is exactly probably what you're talking about. Would video games, would they consider that active?
It's active because
they're having to watch and
they're interacting with it. And I think even back, my kids didn't have phones and they didn't have that kind of stuff, but we had computer games that were educational. And so even back then, we were probably, getting into that.
Right.
Changing their brain development because we were doing those games like that. So I just thought it was just like fascinating. And their thing is that children under 6 should have no interactive screen time.
Interesting, yeah.
And because that's so much brain development is going on during that time. So that's your first graders down. And as you were talking about your kindergarten teachers and all, they are seeing that with that age group.
Right. And, it just keeps, it's not going away. We know technology is not going away. So I think what we have to look at is, how do we regulate it? What do parents do to regulate it? And, what are we finding, not only, fine motor skills, core strength, gross motor skills, which goes back to childhood obesity, which is a major issue that we deal with now with young children, is, that they're, because they're so sedentary. I've spent a lot of time at Little League baseball fields, this spring. But, that's wonderful because you see kids out there running and playing, and they're, even from little T-ballers up, they're doing things. They're not sitting there locked into a screen.
Right.
Which I think we have to really, keep thinking about, and parents have to really watch this. And I think we talked about it a little bit before is, so many children cannot get parents' attention because the parents are on their phone. You hear this all the time, Mama, 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 see that, look. And
that was one of the things they talked about is parents need to model taking breaks from their screen, and that children, in order to thrive, need 33% of the parent's day.
Well,
so a third of your day for young children, you need to be paying attention to them. Now, they didn't say if that included sleep time, so maybe say you have 16 hours a day, so 5.5 hours of attention that child needs.
Absolute attention where you're not glued into something.
Right. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of time.
That is a lot of time. It is a lot of time.
Especially when we are all working and things like that. But that modeling, so that even us, we are not overstimulated and all. So they talked about teaching your kids to have scheduled breaks from their things, so that you build in breaks and do something with them that's not part of electronics or things like that. And I thought, wow, that's good.
Yeah, that is really good. When the things I read about too is it said, we're finding children aren't developing empathy, emotional development, but how does it feel to be somebody else? And it said babies learn empathy by watching their parents, caregivers' face. When you're happy, they're happy. They know when you're mad and you're upset, they can feel it and they watch. They don't get that from a screen. They don't get that from a video. And this is even before language hits. So, that's part of their, you're talking about mental health issues, but that's part of they don't develop that from games. And I think one other thing we have to realize is a lot of parents aren't really monitoring what kids are doing on their devices.
Right.
I mean, there's good educational games, and there's lots of neat things out there on devices, but there's a lot of stuff that's not. And, one thing it talked about, and several things, I think it's this article I have here, it said 90% of 4 to 6-year-old children use some sort of screen media for an average of 2 hours per day, which I think is probably more than that. More than 40% in this age group have a television in their bedroom. And, I think when we have to think about what do parents really know what they're quiet. They're in their room. I'm doing whatever I need to do. I got home from work. I'm trying to do something. But you don't know what they're doing. Whereas in the past, if we had a television, it was in the middle of the room. Everybody watched the same thing. Everybody didn't get to go watch whatever they wanted. I know I had a student one time, we were talking about this, and she said, well, all 3 of my kids have a TV in their room. And I just said, well, why? Why is that? She said, well, my husband likes to play video games on the big TV in the living room, and he doesn't want them to bother him. Okay. So we're going to send them to their rooms and let them do whatever they want.
Well, and then you've got, what are shows that they're watching?
Right.
Are they playing video games? Who are they connecting with? Because there's all that online safety stuff that goes along with video games.
Exactly right.
But the most important thing is there's no interaction at all between the family.
That's right.
And so you're building, that's one of those things you need as resiliency skills is good connections with your family. And so if everybody's off in their own place, that could be a big issue.
And then how many children are going to bed with the TV on? They're...
Well, and there's all the new stuff about the light, what is it called? Blue light?
Yeah.
from that's being emitted from all of our devices and the TV and all, and how that messes up our REM sleep. And
Right. Yeah. That was. I had a student that wrote an article on this, and she said, melatonin is, what helps us know when to go to sleep. But with all the screens and everything, our bodies, and so children are not getting enough sleep. And how many times as adults, we've locked into a show that went on 2 hours longer than we needed to. We needed to be asleep, but we're watching it. It does happen. But if kids have a TV in their room every night and they're doing that, and that blue light, is coming at them, so they're not. It said it's affecting concentration, growth, brain development, mood, immune system, all those things.
oh yes, and if they're not sleeping, their body's not being able to repair and grow as a young child. So that is really, really scary. I know that when I was working in 4-H, I had some kids who said, well, my parents, of course, this is before the smartphones were as big as they are now. My parents make us put our phones in the living room at night.
Right.
And I thought, that's a great thing, because then you're not texting all night. Now they're searching the internet and watching reels. And so that could be an issue as well.
True. And I think, it used to be, when you're talking about bullying and all those kinds of things that go on with children, once in the past, once you got in your home, you were safe, but you're not safe anymore in your home because you've got a device that links you to everybody else. So I think parents have to be very proactive in shutting that down, so somebody can't be after them, when we talk about mental issues, that's a hard thing for young kids and teenagers and even young adults to deal with, that someone can always get in touch with you and can always be harassing you. And they don't understand, Mom just doesn't want me to talk to my friends, or of course, and they don't understand who their friends are. Again, anybody on the other side of that screen can be anybody. They can say, I'm your best friend and I really want to be your friend, but again, you do not know who that person is, so it goes into a lot of safety issues too.
So I had a coworker telling me that they get lost in reels. And so reels are those short videos. Yeah. And so in this webinar yesterday, they were really talking about that being one of the worst things, because they are so addictive, because they're so stimulating to us, and we just have to have more and more and more and more and more. And so people will spend hours and hours looking at YouTube Shorts, Reels, and TikTok. And they really stressed that was one of the worst things for our young adults, especially our teenagers, to be on. And that's why one of the reasons they're not getting any sleep is because all night they're up there doing that.
They can't quit.
They can't quit. And if they do quit, they have like withdrawal symptoms. So I thought that was just like, my gosh, how scary. And then social media companies hire psychologists to figure out what is the most addictive algorithms. And of course, we all know that once you look at one thing, you get tons and tons of that.
Right.
Isn't that just, I was just like I said, this webinar was scary.
Yeah, it is. That is scary. But it is, if you click on something at Facebook, you want to see what that's really about, then you'll get 45. That's all you'll get.
Or you just slow down because someone said something to you and you stop, and then all of a sudden you get like tons and tons of the same thing,
Right.
It don't even have to click on it.
Yeah, so another thing I think to think about, and I guess this is kind of dear to my heart because I have a granddaughter, and I think I may have talked about this before, that they found out could not see on the computer. And the only reason I think the only reason they found it was during the pandemic. And my daughter, who's a reading specialist, she was concerned because she was struggling with reading. And, then she got to watching and realized she couldn't see it on the computer. Now, if they print it out, she does fine. If they do it on the computer, and it's been a really huge battle with the schools to accommodate that.
Well, and all their testing's done.
All the testing is done on the computer anymore. And so they fought, and finally, you know, they've had to get her on a physical disability program to say she can't do that. And so basically, you know, at this point, she's in 5th grade, that they opt her out of all the testing because they don't want to print it out. You know, they don't have the ability to print that out, or they don't want to print it out. So, but you know, I keep thinking, how many children might there be in that same situation that nobody knows about? Because they didn't have a clue that she wasn't seeing it, and she didn't know she wasn't seeing it. She didn't know what everybody else saw. So, you know, I think we could, you know, that's one thing that we have to be really cautious. And of course, schools want you to do this, and you know, and there's a whole different situation in reading a story or listening to a story. They said, well, just let her get her an ebook. And my daughter said, that's not what I don't want her to have. It's okay to listen to a story every once in a while, but I want her to learn to read it. Yeah. You know, and there's a difference between turning a page in a book than watching a story. You know.
So, what are some tips we need to give our parents of young children to sort of protect their child from some of these dangers?
Well, I think the main thing that we talked about is really monitor how much screen time, what the ages are, what they're watching, and you know, your example of active and passive is fascinating too, because don't really even think about that. And I've heard parents say, oh, well, you know, all the video games are great because it gives them, you know, eye-hand coordination, and it does that. You know, I can't dispute that. And I'm not saying a child should never play those, because I think we know that technology is here. It's here to stay, but we have to realize that, you know, and really look at what is happening in a child's brain. And I think we're just on the edge of trying to figure that out, because this is a whole new world. You know, it's never been studied before until right now. We're trying to study, and then I think we're going to come back and say, you know, this is what happened to a whole generation of kids somewhere along the way. and we don't know. You know, I mean, I don't know. I just know that, you know, there is that brain development is very crucial, and we have to be very cautious with how much we put out there for them. And I think what you said too is model. You know, we have to learn to put our phones down and our devices down and not be glued to them 24/7 too.
Right. So I had 3 food for thoughts, but I think I'll choose this one.
Okay.
And I didn't share them with you ahead of time, so you have to work on the slide. So why do so many Americans say they want their children to watch less TV, yet continue to expand the opportunities for them to watch it? More important, why do so many people no longer consider the physical world worth watching? So to me, that's like, why is not going outside, watching the bugs, playing with the dog? My dad was a people watcher. And so, you know, we learned to sit and watch people go by, you know, and think
Which is
about
fascinating.
that. Oh yeah, it's interesting. But to me, those are the kinds of things that kids are missing because they're watching avatars. They're watching,
which is not the real
AI.
world. Which it is not the real world. And you know, you have to realize they don't have to think, because it's all regurgitated to them.
Right.
You know, they don't have to say anything back. They don't have to think. They just have to let somebody fill their brain with stuff. And I think that's probably what we're seeing. You know, critical thinking skills. You know, that's one thing about play. They really learn to get out, and they have to interact with kids, and they, you know, it's fascinating how they can, you know, the social skills that they learn just in play with other children.
So this has been very interesting and such a timely topic. We really appreciate your time coming
you.
and help our families be a little healthier. And We thank all of you for joining us today. Come back for our next episode of Health IQ as we explore another health topic that will be of interest to you.
Special thanks to our guest contributor for this episode, Janet Griffiths of Mesalands Community College. Our host was Brenda Bishop. The Health IQ crew. Director is Robert F. Hockaday. Producers video audio are Robert F. Hockaday and Joyce Runyon. Second AC was Joyce Runyon. Editors are Joyce Runyon and Robert F. Hockaday. Select music provided by David Morris. Funding for Health IQ provided by a New Mexico Better Together grant. Brought to you by the Quay County Health Council. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Quay County Health. If you have any content ideas, reach out to us by email healthhiqpodcast@gmail.com. More info about this topic and more available on our Health IQ blog, qchealthhcouncil.org.
This podcast was created solely for educational purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for advice from a healthcare or mental health professional.